Imagine spending 5 years making a movie. You hired some of the biggest stars in the world, assembled hundreds of crew members, spent well over $200 million, and painstakingly crafted every visual effect, every line of dialogue, and every musical cue. After years of work, you finally have a finished film. Most people would assume that the hard part is over. But in Hollywood, one of the most important decisions is still to come. Before the movie is released, the studio quietly invites around 300 complete strangers into a cinema. They are not film critics, industry executives, or filmmakers. They are ordinary moviegoers recruited to represent the audience that will eventually buy tickets. These people watch an unfinished version of the film, fill out a questionnaire, and then go home. What they don't realize is that their opinions could completely change the movie they have just watched. Their feedback might convince the studio to rewrite the ending, remove an entire subplot, shorten the runtime, or even spend tens of millions of dollars on reshoots. It sounds unbelievable, but this has happened repeatedly throughout Hollywood's history. Some of the biggest blockbusters ever made look the way they do because of the reactions of ordinary audiences sitting in anonymous screening rooms months before the release. In fact, one of the highest grossing films of all time convinced nervous studio executives that it was going to be a huge success because of a single test screening held in a shopping mall. Today, we are pulling back the curtain on one of Hollywood's least understood but most influential practices. We will explore how test screenings actually work, why studios trust complete strangers with multi-million-dollar creative decisions, and two fascinating case studies that demonstrate just how much power an audience can have over the movies we eventually see. By the end of this video, you will realize that many of your favorite movie moments may never have existed without the opinions of a few hundred ordinary people. Hello and welcome to BoxOfficeBhaskar. This channel exists to pull back the curtain on the global film industry. I examine film through three lenses: the business behind it, the content within it, and the audience behavior that drives it all. If you want to understand film at a deeper level, you're in the right place. Most people assume that once filming wraps and editing is complete, the movie is essentially locked and ready for release. In reality, that's often only the beginning of the final stage of production. Months before a film arrives in cinemas, studios organize private test screenings for carefully selected audiences. These viewers are recruited to represent a broad cross-section of the population, with different ages, occupations, genders, and movie-going habits, because the objective is to simulate the audience that will eventually buy tickets. Interestingly, most people attending these screenings know very little about the film they're about to watch. They might know the genre, the age classification, or perhaps recognize one or two actors, but often they don't even know the title. The version they see is rarely finished. Visual effects may be incomplete. Temporary music often replaces the final score. Color grading may not have been completed, and sometimes entire sequences are still missing. Yet, none of that really matters to the studio because they're not testing technical polish. They're testing emotional engagement. Once the screening ends, every audience member is asked to complete a detailed questionnaire covering everything from pacing and character development to favorite scenes and emotional impact. However, two questions matter more than almost anything else. Did you enjoy the movie, and would you recommend it to a friend? That second question is particularly important because word of mouth has always been one of the biggest drivers of box office success. A movie that audiences enthusiastically recommend can enjoy weeks of strong ticket sales, while a film that receives a lukewarm response often struggles after its opening weekend. In many cases, a smaller group of audience members remains behind for an in-depth focus group where moderators explore the reasons behind their reactions. Why didn't a particular joke work? Did a character feel believable? Was the end satisfying or confusing? Those conversations can trigger remarkably significant changes. Dialogues may be rewritten, scenes shortened, characters removed, pacing adjusted, and in extreme cases, entire endings discarded and rebuilt from scratch. By the time a movie finally reaches cinemas, there is a very real possibility that it's quite different from the version those first audiences experienced. It is easy to think of test screenings as a product of today's data-driven Hollywood, where studios obsess over audience analytics and predictive modeling. Surprisingly, the practice is almost as old as cinema itself. One of the earliest pioneers was silent film legend Harold Lloyd, who during the late 1920s began quietly screening rough cuts of his comedies to small audiences before their official release. Rather than relying solely on his own instincts, Lloyd carefully observed audience behavior. He watched where people laughed, when they became restless, and which jokes failed to generate any reaction at all. Those observations allowed him to refine the timing of his films long before sophisticated audience research existed. By the late 1930s, preview screenings had become sufficiently common that even classics like The Wizard of Oz were shown to audiences before release, with feedback influencing editing decisions. For much of the 20th century, however, the process remained relatively informal. Experienced producers and studio executives balanced audience reactions with their own creative judgment, often relying just as much on instinct as on research. Everything changed during the rise of the modern blockbuster. Beginning in the 1970s, Hollywood budgets increased dramatically. Nationwide releases became standard practice, and marketing campaigns grew into massive financial commitments. Suddenly, studios weren't thinking a few $1 million on a film, they were risking hundreds of millions. Under those circumstances, relying purely on creative instinct became an increasingly dangerous strategy. Audience testing evolved into sophisticated science. Professional research companies developed structured recruitment methods and detailed questionnaires designed to identify patterns in audience behavior. Today, it is estimated that about 90% of major Hollywood studio films undergo at least one test screening before release, with many being screened several times as filmmakers refine the edit based on audience feedback. It is an extraordinary process when you stop to think about it. Nearly every major blockbuster you've watched over the past few decades has almost certainly been shaped not only by the creative vision of its filmmakers, but also by the reactions of ordinary people sitting anonymously in a dark cinema months before anyone else ever saw the film. If there is one example that perfectly illustrates the power of test screenings, it is World War Z. By the time production wrapped on the Brad Pitt zombie thriller, the filmmakers believed they had a completed movie. Unfortunately, early audiences strongly disagreed. The biggest issue was the entire third act. Rather than delivering a satisfying conclusion, the film lost momentum. The pacing slowed dramatically and viewers left feeling underwhelmed. This was not a case of audiences disliking a single scene or wanting a few scenes trimmed. The core problem was the entire ending did not work. Paramount Pictures now faced an extraordinarily expensive decision. They could release the movie in its existing form and hope general audiences responded more positively than the test audiences had. Or they could accept that the climax had failed and invest millions of additional dollars rebuilding it. The studio chose the second option. Writer Damon Lindelof was brought in to completely rethink the final act, resulting in approximately 40 minutes of the movie being rewritten and reshot over an additional 7 weeks of production. That is an astonishing amount of work for a film that had already completed principal photography. Most productions are fortunate to receive a few days of additional photography to fix isolated problems, but World War Z effectively replaced its entire ending after the movie was supposedly finished. In the end, the gamble paid off. World War Z went on to earn more than $500 million worldwide, becoming the highest grossing zombie film ever released at that point. We will never know whether the original ending would have produced the same result, but what we do know is that a room full of ordinary moviegoers convinced one of Hollywood's biggest studios to dismantle a completed film and rebuild its climax from the ground up. Few examples demonstrate the extraordinary influence of test screenings more clearly than that. If World War Z demonstrated how test screenings can rescue a troubled movie, then Titanic shows how they can do something equally important: give a nervous studio the confidence to stay the course. It's easy to forget today that before Titanic became one of the biggest box office successes in cinema history, it was widely expected to become one of Hollywood's greatest financial disasters. Directed by James Cameron, the production was plagued by stories of budget overruns, production delays, and an unprecedented level of spending. The film ultimately became the first movie ever to cost around $200 million, an almost unimaginable figure in the mid-1990s. Industry publications openly questioned whether it could ever make its money back, while critics who hadn't even seen the finished film were predicting that it would sink financially just like the ship it portrayed. The pressure on both Cameron and 20th Century Fox was immense. Then came a relatively ordinary test screening in a shopping mall in Minneapolis. Unlike the headlines surrounding the production, the audience had no preconceived narrative about runway budgets or production chaos. They simply watched the movie. What happened surprised everyone involved. Despite the film's lengthy runtime of more than 3 hours, the audience remained completely engaged from beginning to end. They laughed, they cried, they applauded, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. For studio executives, this screening became one of the first pieces of genuine evidence that the film connected with ordinary audiences in a way that the industry insiders had failed to appreciate. It did not magically eliminate the financial risk, but it gave the studio something far more valuable than optimistic predictions. It gave them confidence based on real audience behavior. Titanic went on to earn more than $2 billion worldwide after subsequent re-releases, won 11 Academy Awards, and became one of the defining films of its generation. But before any of that happened, its future looked remarkably uncertain. In this case, the test screening did not fundamentally change the movie itself. Instead, it changed the confidence of the people responsible for releasing it. Sometimes, audience feedback isn't about fixing a film. Sometimes, it's about proving that the filmmakers got it right all along. So, after all of this, we're left with an interesting question. Do test screenings actually improve movies, or do they simply make them safer? The answer is probably somewhere in between. There are undeniable success stories. World War Z rebuilt an ending that audiences rejected and went on to become a global hit. Titanic reassured nervous executives that they were backing something genuinely special despite overwhelming industry skepticism. Some filmmakers argue that relying too heavily on audience feedback encourages studios to avoid creative risks, producing movies that appeal to the broadest possible audience rather than challenging viewers with bold and unconventional ideas. A truly original film may confuse audiences the first time they see it, yet become a masterpiece years later. If every creative decision were determined by immediate audience reactions, some of cinema's most daring works might never have survived the editing room. Ultimately, test screenings are neither heroes nor villains. They are simply another tool, one that sits at the intersection of art and commerce. The next time you watch a movie with a perfectly timed joke, a heartbreaking character death, or an ending that leaves the entire cinema applauding, there is a very real chance that moment wasn't part of the filmmaker's original plan. It may exist because months before you ever bought your ticket, a room full of complete strangers laughed, cried, gasped, or sat in complete silence. Those reactions quietly shaped the film you eventually watched, reminding us that while directors might create movies, audiences often help finish them. I hope you liked this video. Please subscribe to my channel for more videos about the global film industry. And let me know in the comments, do you think test screenings make movies better, or do they dilute a director's original vision? I would love to hear your thoughts. I will be back with another video very soon. Until then, it's bye from Box Office Bhaskar.